Thank you for joining today's analysis. Part 1. The moment the red line is crossed, a strategic shift that could redefine the rules of conflict according to analysts. There are moments in geopolitics when a single action does not just change the situation. It changes the rules of the game itself. What we are witnessing now is one of those moments. Iran is no longer operating solely in the shadows. For years, the structure of confrontation in the Middle East followed a relatively predictable pattern. Iran projected influence through proxy networks, indirect engagements, and calibrated escalation. The United States and its allies responded with containment, deterrence, and selective strikes. This balance, fragile but functional, allowed all sides to compete without crossing into full-scale confrontation. But according to analysts, that balance is now under pressure. Because something fundamental has changed. Iran has begun to signal a willingness to move beyond indirect warfare and employ conventional firepower in a more visible and direct manner. This is not simply a tactical adjustment. It is a strategic statement. And the implications of that statement are profound. Because once a red line is crossed, it does not easily return to where it was before. According to analysts, the key question is not whether Iran can use conventional capabilities. It always had that capacity. The real question is why now? Why shift from ambiguity to visibility? Why accept higher levels of risk in a system that was designed to manage escalation? The answer, according to analysts, lies in deterrence credibility. Deterrence is not static. It must be demonstrated. And when one side perceives that its deterrence is being eroded, it must act to restore it. Iran's recent actions suggest that it believes the existing balance no longer serves its interests, that indirect pressure is no longer sufficient, that the cost imposed on its adversaries must become more immediate, more visible, and more difficult to ignore. This is where the concept of crossing the red line becomes critical. A red line is not just a boundary. It is a signal of intent, a signal of capability, and a signal of willingness to escalate. According to analysts, by crossing this line, Iran is not simply responding to events. It is attempting to reshape expectations, to redefine what is considered acceptable, to expand the space in which it can operate. But every action at this level generates a reaction, and that reaction is where the real risk begins. The United States now faces a strategic dilemma. Respond too strongly, and the conflict could escalate beyond control. Respond too weakly, and the credibility of deterrence is undermined. According to analysts, this is the classic trap of escalation dynamics. There is no easy path forward, only trade-offs. At the same time, Israel is operating under increasing pressure. Its security environment is becoming more complex, more layered, and more unpredictable. It is no longer dealing with isolated threats, but with a networked system of pressures. According to analysts, this transforms defense into a continuous process, not a series of events, but a sustained condition. And sustaining that condition requires resources, coordination, and resilience. This brings us to a deeper question. Is this still a contained conflict? Or is it the beginning of something larger? According to analysts, the signs point toward expansion, not necessarily in terms of immediate large-scale war, but in terms of scope, geographic scope, strategic scope, and systemic scope. The battlefield is no longer defined by borders. It extends across regions, across domains, across systems. Missiles and drones are only part of the picture. Economic pressure, energy disruptions, information campaigns. All of these elements are now integrated into a single strategic framework. This is what analysts describe as hybrid warfare. And in hybrid warfare, the lines between war and peace become blurred. This blurring creates uncertainty, and uncertainty creates risk. One of the most critical risks is miscalculation. When multiple actors operate within overlapping systems, each with its own objectives and constraints, the probability of unintended escalation increases. According to analysts, this is where the situation becomes most dangerous. Not when actions are deliberate, but when they are misinterpreted. A defensive move seen as offensive. A limited strike perceived as a signal of broader intent. These misinterpretations can trigger reactions that no side initially intended. And once that chain reaction begins, it becomes difficult to control. Another important dimension is the global context. This conflict does not exist in isolation. It is connected to broader strategic competitions. between major powers, between competing visions of order. According to analysts, this interconnectedness amplifies the stakes, because outcomes in one region influence calculations in another. This is why external actors are closely watching developments, not necessarily to intervene directly, but to position themselves strategically, to take advantage of shifts, to protect their interests. And, in doing so, they become part of the system. This increases complexity, and complexity reduces predictability. At the same time, the economic dimension cannot be ignored. Energy markets are sensitive to disruption. Supply chains are vulnerable to instability. According to analysts, even limited incidents can have outsized effects. Prices fluctuate. Markets react. Political pressure builds. These effects extend far beyond the immediate conflict zone. This is how regional conflicts become global concerns. So where does this leave us? According to analysts, we are at a transitional moment. A moment where the old rules are weakening, but new rules have not yet fully formed. This creates a window of uncertainty. And in that window, strategic decisions carry greater weight, because they help shape what comes next. The crossing of a red line is not the end of a process. It is the beginning of a new phase. A phase defined by higher stakes, greater risks, and deeper consequences. The question now is not whether the situation will change. It already has. The question is how far that change will go, and whether it can be managed, or whether it will continue to escalate beyond the control of those involved. According to analysts, the answer to that question will define not only the future of this conflict, but the future of the broader strategic landscape. Part 2. The deeper strategic architecture, doctrine, power sources, and the technological logic shaping the conflict. According to analysts, to fully understand why the red line was crossed, it is necessary to step back and examine the structural foundations that have been building over decades. What appears today as a sudden escalation is, in reality, the outcome of long-term strategic evolution. At the center of this evolution is Iran's transformation in military doctrine. Historically, Iran developed its strategy under conditions of constraint, economic sanctions, technological isolation, and the presence of stronger military adversaries. These constraints did not weaken its strategy. They shaped it. According to analysts, Iran adopted a doctrine based on asymmetric warfare, designed not to defeat stronger opponents in direct confrontation, but to offset their advantages. This doctrine rested on three pillars. First, indirect engagement through proxy forces across the region. Second, development of missile capabilities as a deterrent tool. Third, strategic depth, using geography and dispersion to avoid rapid neutralization. For years, this model proved effective. It allowed Iran to project influence while minimizing exposure. But as the strategic environment evolved, so did the limitations of this approach. According to analysts, proxy warfare alone could no longer generate sufficient deterrence. It created pressure, but not always immediate consequences. And in a system where deterrence must be visible, delayed effects are often insufficient. This is where the shift toward integrating conventional firepower becomes significant. Iran is not abandoning its previous doctrine. It is expanding it. By combining direct and indirect methods, Iran creates a hybrid operational model that increases both flexibility and uncertainty. From a strategic perspective, this introduces a new variable: unpredictability. Because adversaries must now prepare for both visible and indirect threats simultaneously. This dual-layer strategy is reinforced by Iran's technological focus. Missile systems, in particular, have become a central component of its power structure. These systems are not designed for precision dominance in the traditional sense. They are designed for persistence, mobility, and scalability. According to analysts, this reflects a different understanding of power. Not power as immediate destruction, but power as sustained pressure. A missile that forces a response is strategically valuable, even if its physical impact is limited, because it triggers cost, and cost, over time, becomes a decisive factor. This is closely linked to the rise of unmanned systems. Drones, especially low-cost variants, have transformed the operational environment. They can be deployed in large numbers, used for reconnaissance or attack, and integrated into broader strike patterns. According to analysts, drones represent a democratization of air power. They reduce the barrier to entry, and they complicate defense. Traditional air defense systems were designed to intercept high-value targets. But when faced with multiple low-cost threats, the equation changes. Defense becomes a resource problem, not just a technological one. This creates what analysts describe as an asymmetrical cost dynamic. One side spends relatively little to launch an attack. The other spends significantly more to defend against it. Over time, this imbalance becomes strategically significant, because sustainability becomes more important than capability. On the opposing side, the United States and its allies operate within a different doctrinal framework. Their strength lies in precision, integration, and global reach. According to analysts, this model is built on the assumption of achieving decisive effects within a limited time frame. But the current conflict environment challenges that assumption, because the adversary is not structured to collapse quickly. Instead, it is structured to endure. This creates a mismatch between operational expectations and strategic reality. The United States can deliver precise and powerful responses, but those responses may not produce lasting strategic outcomes. This is where the concept of strategic patience becomes critical. According to analysts, the side that can sustain pressure over time without collapsing internally gains a significant advantage. And this is not purely a military question. It is also political, economic, and social. Israel's position adds another layer of complexity. Its doctrine emphasizes rapid response and active defense. Systems are designed to intercept incoming threats and protect critical infrastructure. According to analysts, this creates a highly responsive defensive network. But it also creates continuous operational demand, because threats are not isolated. They are persistent, and persistence forces constant readiness. This readiness requires resources, coordination, and resilience. Over time, even the most advanced systems can face strain, particularly in a multi-front environment. Beyond individual actors, the broader strategic environment plays a crucial role. The Middle East is not a single battlefield. It is a network of interconnected spaces. Actions in one area influence dynamics in another. According to analysts, this interconnectedness is a defining feature of modern conflict. It creates a situation where local actions have regional and even global implications. Energy infrastructure is a key example. Oil production, transport routes, and maritime choke points are all critical components of the global economy. Disruptions in these areas do not remain localized. They ripple outward, affecting markets, policies, and strategic decisions. This adds an economic dimension to the conflict that cannot be ignored. At the same time, external powers are shaping the environment indirectly. Russia, according to analysts, uses diplomatic positioning and selective support to influence outcomes without direct engagement. China focuses on economic stability and long-term positioning, ensuring its interests are protected in a changing landscape. Together, these actors contribute to a multipolar system. In such a system, power is not centralized. It is distributed across multiple actors with overlapping interests. This distribution increases complexity and reduces predictability. Another important factor is the evolution of military technology. Modern warfare integrates cyber capabilities, real-time intelligence, and networked systems. According to analysts, these technologies enhance both offensive and defensive capabilities, but they also increase the speed of decision-making, and faster decisions leave less room for correction. This raises the risk of escalation, because mistakes can propagate quickly. At the doctrinal level, deterrence itself is being redefined. Traditional deterrence relied on the threat of overwhelming retaliation, but in a conflict characterized by persistence and asymmetry, that model becomes less effective. According to analysts, deterrence now depends on credibility and continuity, not just the ability to respond, but the willingness to sustain pressure. This shifts the focus from decisive outcomes to long-term positioning, from winning battles to shaping trajectories, and from dominance to resilience. These shifts form the strategic foundation of the current conflict. They explain why actions that appear tactical are, in fact, part of a broader structural transformation, a transformation that is still unfolding, and one that will continue to shape the direction of events in the phases ahead. Part 3. The battlefield in motion, real-world execution, strategic mechanisms, and the shifting balance of power according to analysts. The conflict has now entered a phase where strategy is no longer abstract. It is being tested in real time, across multiple domains, under continuous pressure. What matters at this stage is not what each side intends, but how those intentions are translated into operational patterns. And those patterns reveal a clear reality. This is no longer a conflict seeking rapid resolution. It is a conflict designed to persist. According to analysts, the current mechanism driving the conflict is controlled escalation combined with sustained pressure. Each actor is operating within a narrow margin, pushing forward, but carefully avoiding actions that would trigger uncontrollable retaliation. This creates a dynamic equilibrium, not stable, but managed. Iran's operational behavior reflects this balance. Its use of missiles and drones is not random. It is calibrated. Targets are selected not only for their tactical value, but for their signaling effect. Each strike communicates capability, intent, and reach. According to analysts, the objective is not immediate destruction. It is strategic messaging through action. By maintaining a steady tempo of operations, Iran attempts to shape the rhythm of the conflict. It seeks to impose a pattern where pressure is continuous, forcing its adversaries into a reactive posture. And in strategic terms, controlling the rhythm often means controlling the direction. At the same time, Iran avoids crossing thresholds that would justify overwhelming retaliation. This restraint is not a sign of limitation. It is a component of strategy, because escalation, once uncontrolled, reduces options, and maintaining options is critical in a prolonged conflict. On the opposing side, Israel's operational model is built around immediate response. Every incoming threat is detected, tracked, and engaged. According to analysts, this creates a highly efficient defensive system, but it also creates a constant operational burden, because threats are not isolated events. They are continuous. This continuity forces Israel into a state of sustained readiness. And sustained readiness requires sustained resources. This is where the concept of saturation becomes critical. When multiple threats arrive simultaneously, drones, rockets, missiles, the defensive system must allocate resources dynamically. Even with high interception rates, the probability of penetration increases under pressure. And according to analysts, even limited penetration carries strategic significance, because it affects perception of vulnerability, perception of control, and perception, in modern conflict, directly influences decision-making. The United States, positioned within this environment, operates with a broader strategic objective. Its role is not limited to direct engagement. It is also about maintaining regional balance. According to analysts, this introduces a complex set of constraints. Actions must be effective, but also measured, strong enough to maintain credibility, but controlled enough to avoid escalation. This balancing act defines the current American posture. However, balance becomes increasingly difficult as the number of variables increases. And in this conflict, variables are expanding. Lebanon, for example, represents a significant escalation point. According to analysts, the presence of military operations in such a densely populated and politically sensitive environment increases the risk of unintended consequences. Urban warfare introduces unique challenges. Limited visibility, civilian presence, complex terrain. These factors reduce the effectiveness of conventional advantages and increase the likelihood of prolonged engagements. At the same time, non-state actors continue to play a critical role. Hezbollah and other aligned groups operate within a network structure, contributing to the overall pressure without being fully centralized. According to analysts, this decentralization complicates response, because there is no single point of control. And without centralized control, deterrence becomes less predictable. Another key dimension is the maritime domain. The incident involving an oil tanker highlights the vulnerability of global energy routes. These routes are not only economic assets, they are strategic targets. According to analysts, disrupting energy flows introduces a second layer of pressure, one that extends beyond the battlefield into global markets. This transforms local actions into global signals. And global signals influence strategic calculations far beyond the region. At the same time, external actors continue to shape the balance. Russia, according to analysts, leverages the situation to redistribute strategic attention. By maintaining a presence and supporting certain positions diplomatically, it can influence outcomes indirectly. China, while less directly involved, contributes through economic stability and long-term positioning. Together, these actors reinforce a multipolar structure. And in a multipolar structure, power is fluid. It shifts, not through decisive victories, but through accumulated advantage. According to analysts, the current balance of power is not defined by dominance. It is defined by sustainability. Which side can maintain pressure longer? Which side can absorb cost? Which side can adapt to changing conditions? These questions are becoming more important than traditional measures of strength. This is why the conflict does not produce clear winners. Instead, it produces gradual shifts. Shifts in capability, shifts in perception, shifts in influence. And over time, these shifts redefine the strategic landscape. Another critical mechanism is the role of information. Narratives are actively shaped by all sides. Each action is framed to support a broader strategic message. According to analysts, information is not separate from the battlefield. It is part of it, because perception influences support, and support influences capability. This creates a feedback loop. Military actions shape narratives. Narratives shape responses. Responses shape future actions. This loop sustains the conflict. At this stage, the conflict can be understood as a system of pressures. Military pressure, economic pressure, political pressure, psychological pressure. No single element determines the outcome, but together, they create momentum. According to analysts, the key question is whether this momentum will stabilize or escalate. Stabilization would require alignment of interests and clear thresholds. Escalation requires only one miscalculation. And in a system this complex, miscalculations are always possible. This is the reality of the current phase. A conflict that is neither fully controlled nor fully uncontrolled, operating within a narrow margin, where each decision matters, and where the balance of power is not fixed, but continuously evolving, shaped not by a single decisive moment, but by the accumulation of pressure over time. The long-term consequences, global implications, and the uncertain future of a conflict reshaping the international order according to analysts. What we are witnessing is no longer a contained regional confrontation. It is the early stage of a broader structural transformation. The significance of this conflict does not lie only in its immediate military outcomes, but in the long-term consequences it is already setting in motion. The first and most critical consequence is the erosion of traditional deterrence frameworks. For decades, deterrence operated on a relatively clear logic: overwhelming force would prevent escalation. But in the current environment, that logic is being tested. According to analysts, when an actor is willing to absorb pressure and continue operating under sustained stress, deterrence becomes less about capability and more about endurance. This shift has global implications, because it challenges a foundational assumption of modern military strategy, that superior force guarantees strategic control. Instead, the current conflict suggests something different: that resilience can offset superiority, and that persistence can undermine dominance. This is not just a regional development. It is a global signal. At the same time, the conflict is accelerating the transition toward a multipolar world. According to analysts, the distribution of power is becoming more fragmented. The United States remains a dominant actor, but it no longer operates without constraints. Regional powers are asserting themselves, and external actors such as Russia and China are shaping outcomes in indirect but meaningful ways. This creates a more competitive environment, where influence is contested, where alliances are fluid, and where outcomes are less predictable. In such a system, conflicts are no longer isolated. They are interconnected. Actions in one region influence decisions in another. This interconnectedness increases the stakes, because local escalation can trigger global consequences. Energy markets provide a clear example. According to analysts, disruptions in energy infrastructure or transport routes do not remain confined to the region. They affect global supply chains, pricing structures, and economic stability. This creates a feedback loop. Military actions influence markets. Markets influence political decisions. Political decisions influence military strategies. And the cycle continues. Another important consequence is the normalization of hybrid warfare. The integration of military, economic, informational, and psychological elements into a single strategic framework is becoming standard practice. According to analysts, this model is likely to define future conflicts because it allows actors to operate across multiple domains simultaneously, and because it complicates response. Traditional military superiority becomes less decisive when the battlefield extends beyond physical space. This has implications not only for the Middle East, but for global security as a whole. Nations will need to adapt, not only in terms of military capability, but in terms of economic resilience, information control, and strategic coordination. At the same time, the risk of miscalculation remains one of the most significant threats. According to analysts, the complexity of the current system increases the likelihood of unintended escalation. With multiple actors operating independently yet interconnected, a single incident can trigger a chain reaction. This is particularly relevant in areas like Lebanon, where local dynamics are tightly linked to broader strategic interests. Urban environments, proxy involvement, high political sensitivity. These factors combine to create a highly volatile situation, and volatility reduces control. This brings us to the question of future trajectories. According to analysts, there are several possible scenarios. The first is prolonged equilibrium, a state where the conflict continues at a controlled level, with periodic escalations but no decisive resolution. This scenario would result in sustained pressure, gradual shifts in power, and long-term resource consumption. The second is escalation, a scenario where the conflict expands beyond current boundaries, involving additional actors and multiple fronts. This would significantly increase the risk of broader regional or even global confrontation. The third is strategic recalibration, a scenario where one or more actors adjust their approach, potentially opening space for negotiation or de-escalation. According to analysts, this would likely occur only if the cost of continued conflict exceeds perceived benefits. Each scenario carries its own risks, and none offer easy outcomes. This reflects the fundamental nature of the current conflict. It is not structured for quick resolution. It is structured for endurance. Another key factor shaping the future is internal stability. According to analysts, the ability of each actor to maintain internal cohesion, political, economic, and social, will play a decisive role. External strength is important, but internal resilience is critical, because prolonged conflict places pressure not only on military systems, but on entire societies. This adds another layer to the strategic equation. Victory is no longer defined solely by battlefield outcomes. It is defined by the ability to sustain operations over time, to manage internal pressures, and to adapt to changing conditions. In this sense, the conflict becomes a test of systems, not just armies, but institutions, economies, and governance structures. The implications of this test extend far beyond the region. According to analysts, the outcome will influence how future conflicts are conducted, how alliances are formed, and how power is understood. It will shape expectations, strategies, and behaviors across the global system. One conclusion, however, is already emerging. The world is entering a period of increased complexity, where conflicts are longer, more interconnected, and more difficult to control. In such a world, certainty becomes rare, and adaptability becomes essential. The current conflict is not the end of a process. It is the beginning of a new phase, a phase that will redefine the strategic landscape for years to come. And as this phase unfolds, the decisions made now will have consequences that extend far into the future. According to analysts, understanding these dynamics is not just important. It is necessary, because in a system defined by change, those who fail to adapt will struggle to maintain their position, and those who understand the shifting balance will shape what comes next. Please tune in for a more detailed analysis in the next video.